is Angela Passalacqua, and I'm an artist at Blackfish Gallery, and this is my exhibition. It's April 2013. This painting right here is entitled Era más joven yo que el mundo entero, which literally translates to I was younger than the whole world. And this entire body of work is based on a poem by Pablo Neruda called First Travelings, or Primero Viajes. The infant in this poem relates directly to this other painting that we'll look at a little bit later. But I really did want to capture this openness to the world and being brand new and just being kind of exuberant and curious and not really concerned with what's happened in the past, because he's unformed at this point. You can see the book is blank, and I'll show you in this other painting where there's actually a pen, so this young man is starting to write his book. But at this point, he's very innocent and very new, and you can see the shoes up in the corner right here. That's also a line from the poem. Todos los zapatos. He'd never actually seen them. And so everything is new, even something as mundane as a shoe. The title of this show is called Delayed Meaning. And I chose that title because I was working from a poem and I was interpreting it and painting from images that that poem conjured in my mind. So it was a translation in paint, so to speak. And then there was also the translation from Spanish to English. And I was very curious as to how all that happens and how we communicate to the audience. This second piece, I think, relates to both of them as well. It's a drawing that I based on another line in the poem about Venus, how Venus was real. And Venus usually is associated with Cupid, often turns up in paintings featuring Cupid from the Renaissance. And so I kind of interpreted my own Cupid, who's flying up above there. And this Venus is an older, wiser woman who's really communicating with that bird. And the bird is hope, and the child is hope, and then there's kind of a maelstrom going up there as well. It's a spiral image, which I suppose could be threatening, but it can also be a stand-in for growth. That's how I viewed it anyway. And this is the baby here as a young man, and the title of this one is Todos los sombreros del mundo, all the hats of the world. And it's a young man, and he's just starting to write his life. And I chose this motif kind of as a heart. He's very passionate about what his life is going to be like. He really hasn't had too much unhappiness at this point in time. And there again, the moon, which shows up in a lot of these works, as we'll see as we go through more of the paintings, is kind of looking at the night and mysteriousness and the ambiguity of how we see things at night rather than in the daytime. This piece is entitled Blueprint for an Exhibition, and it was a very last-minute decision to include it in the show. I had these tracings of drawings that I had done hanging on my studio wall for the last, the entire time I've been working on these. And if you look closely, you will see most of the motifs that I've used in this painting represented here. This is the goat here, and he extends over here. And this is the young man. Another one of the young man, and directions. These were totally unplanned. I was just very, it was a very pragmatic exercise just to get the drawings do a cartoon of the drawings onto the board so I could have the beginnings of the painting. So you can see that going on here. You can see some linear lines that were probably establishing some borders. This one here, you can see a small putti here. You can see the very young child in the goat cart who's holding the reins over to the goat. We have a horse that didn't make it into these paintings. That could have been from another body of work entirely. I almost used this motif. That's from another motif from a medieval manuscript, but it didn't seem to work anywhere. I think I had it in one or two of the paintings, but I ended up painting over it because it just simply wasn't working. This piece here, you can clearly see, the image of the cherubs here, holding a wing here, another one here, holding a wing here. You can see the wanderer along here, and you can see that decorative motif right here in the wanderer. This actually was taken from a beautifully illuminated capital B, and I can't remember the manuscript, but I did a freehand drawing of that and just loved it. And here's the heart image that was another motif that I had used from earlier than I think this was the inside of the bee. You can actually see the shape of the bee here. So these relate. The way these ended up in the show is that when artists in other studios would come in to look, they'd always remark on how much they liked them and what was I going to do with them. And I really hadn't thought about doing anything with them. They were just kind of the planning that goes in when you make a painting. And they were off the drawings that I had done, in preparation for these paintings. The last minute, my studio mate said, I really like those. I think you should put them in the show. So I did, and people really seemed to respond to them. I think it's maybe the white and blue. Some viewers thought that, these were constellations. These are actually my fingerprints as I'm kind of positioning the paper, and it all lifts off a little bit the more you handle it. And I thought that was that was a wonderful observation. But this is all by accident. It was nothing purposeful at all. And I think probably that has something to do with why people respond to them. They're very free. They've got a charm to them. It looks unstudied because it is unstudied. So, I'm thinking the next time when I'm doing this, I'll be a little more careful of these tracings. But we'll see if they lose some of their spontaneity if I do that. But I will think I'll be more careful of them. I have a lot more. These are the only ones I chose to put in the show. And they literally are. They are the blueprints of this exhibition. The title of this piece is Bringing in the Night, and its companion is over here called Bringing in the Day. But first I'll talk about this one. You'll notice that in both paintings it's the same goat, and here's the infant again. And there are lots, here's the moon and different planets. So it's kind of my take on the Très Recherche of the Duc de Jambéry, which I've always loved, and I just really love that blue also. But there is that image of the chariot Apollo is driving across on each one of the illuminated pages, and I wanted to do something with that idea. You'll notice that the goat has a pattern on him, and I thought that that was interesting, the way that that really flattened out the space and really warmed it up and just sort of popped him. He really kind of stands out. And then that blue is a real flat blue that kind of disperses throughout the painting and becomes much more diffuse in this area up here. If we walk over here, this is Bringing in the Day. It's essentially the same image, only it's much brighter. It's much more golden in tones, and the planets and the moon are pretty much just the colors that you might associate with you know, the daytime, with the sun and the whiteness of the moon and the goldenness of the sun here, and Mars fading in the background. And also you'll notice these borders on the edges that are pretty consistent in just about all of these works. And I originally had thought of them as borders, but then the farther along I got in this body of work, I realized I was, symbolically for me, they were lines of the poem. And they stopped being borders, although they function that way, but they're imbued with more depth, I think, because I can relate to the poem. This middle piece right here, again, you see the spiral, and you'll also, and here's the cherubs again, that are going to turn up in other works as well, and this ship, and you will see the ship motif occurring in a number of paintings, and that really is, it's a sign of a journey that they're starting, although in this case it's almost as if these cherubs are blowing the wind that's helping the ship go. So it's real positive energy that they're giving to that ship. This is a series of 4 drawings that I did while I was in Buenos Aires in February. And I hadn't really drawn in charcoal too much recently, and so I wanted to explore that medium again. So I took the title of the poem, which is Primeros Viajes, and I continued with this ship thing. And it was every day I draw a ship. And I started out with 4, and then the next drawing I had 3, and that really wasn't purposeful. It just seemed like compositionally it worked. And the ships repeat themselves in these drawings. And then I thought, well, I like that idea of going from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1, because the last ship on the very end is, you know, it's really journeying out into the future. And, you know, this one has all the possibilities. It has kind of a ship listing here, you know, a ship kind of going into a storm, a ship sort of at rest. And this one is a ship that was used for simply hauling things. Ancient delivery system, if you will. And the charcoal I had a lot of fun with the charcoal. I diffused the charcoal with water. I didn't realize that you could do that. And so we had an old leaky iron in this flat we were renting. And so I used that spray to actually disperse the charcoal. And you can see how it kind of goes off in this direction and goes off here, you know, comes down here. That gives it a feel of water and sea foam. And I just thought that was wonderful. I just thought it really was exactly what I was trying to do, convey in these. And although they start off rather stormy looking, they get quieter as they move down, until at the final one, you just see the one ship that's heading off in this direction. This is the only series where I actually put the lines of the poem. I got to be very fussy about the translator's translation. And so I think I'd been working with this poem so long and had memorized it in its original Spanish that I thought that I could translate it myself. I wanted to do that. But it didn't take me very long to realize that that's very difficult to do. And I have a lot more respect for that translator now, having tried to do it myself. And I also realized that I'd already done my own translation in the painting, so it seemed rather redundant to do this other step. Some viewers were interested in looking at the poem and reading it in its entirety, and so I gave them that information. And I hope they do, because it is a beautiful poem. But for the purposes of this exhibition, I think the paintings speak for themselves and convey at least how I responded to the poem, and how everyone's going to have their own individual responses anyway. So the text translation seemed real extraneous to what I was doing here. The title of this piece is The Wanderer. And, again, we have a young man who's going off into the world, and we have a ship here that's sort of symbolic of this journey he's going to be taking. And I've often used a horse with a rider, and just about every recent show I've had. And I think for me, it's kind of like when I start a new body of work, it's like getting back in the saddle. It has that significance, although this was not the first piece that I completed for this exhibition. I wanted to talk a little bit about just technical information. I really limited my palette pretty much to just translucent colors. And I didn't use much titanium white. I pretty much did my mixing with zinc white and lead white, or fake lead white. Occasionally the real thing, but in very, very modest amounts. And I would lay on a layer and then take it off. And I would take it off with just putting newspaper down or tissue paper, but I would lift off some of the paint so that you could see what was underneath. And the layers are very, very thinly painted, and you need to let the paint dry. I found at least 3 days before I could go back in and put on another layer. So at times I felt I was really painting more with my hands than I was with brushes. But the surface that you get while doing that was really quite wonderful. I mean, you can see in areas like here, you can see, the paint, the color underneath that's really shining through. Same thing up here. And it just kind of creates a real, like you're looking through glass. And I just love that effect. On this painting, I've done this in 2 of them, is that I actually, on the last layer, used a medium with Damar varnish, so it has more of a shine to it. Yet I left the horse and the rider very matte, and it tends to just, really pop those. It pops them out of the landscape, so it comes forward. And here again is the relationship to a map. And there's a castle form here and a castle form way up there. And it's in the upper right corner of the painting, which has little dots here that are like a map. And that's where he's traveling to, but he hasn't quite reached it yet. He isn't even aware that he's following a map, really. But there are some map symbols in this painting. You often see this kind of thing on a map as well. The title of this piece is Submerged Tower, which is a stand-in for me for the subconscious. And this was the first painting I completed when I was working on this body of work. And this castle form is kind of a composite of different castles that I had been looking at in art history books. And I just created my own. And I wanted really to have this kind of faceted curvature up here, as well as kind of the cone-like towers that reminded me of like children's playing blocks, and I liked that idea. And then I also incorporated like a puzzle piece. So this castle is fitting into the puzzle of the whole universe. And here's the two ships again. This was the first piece that I really started layering a lot. And it's a very dark piece. And it started out on a red ground, a deep red ground. It just kept getting lighter and darker and lighter and darker, and I was pushing and pulling a lot. You know, again, you know, this background here has the Damar varnish in it, so it's shiny, whereas the castle puzzle piece is not. I left that matte so it would pop. I also left the globe here with the sun and the moon, that I actually borrowed that motif from Giorgione. I think he has a drawing of that I thought was just wonderful and really fit in just perfect with what I was trying to do. Throughout the beginning of this painting, I actually left this strip blank, and I wasn't quite sure how I was going to finish that off. I originally thought that I would gold leaf it, but in order to do that, the paint had to be like totally dry. It would have been better to have done the gold leaf first, but I wasn't sure how the painting was going to evolve. I never am really. They rarely turn out the way I conceived in the beginning. But that's part of the adventure of painting. I actually like that, because the painting and I then have a dialogue, and it directs me. There's some really nice highlights down in here that just glow, and I really was quite happy with how that turned out. And you can just see it, it's like this light is just moving behind this puzzle piece all the way to the other side. And there's a tiny little island here behind that orb that sits, well, it just teeters right on that gold. Gravity doesn't look like it has anything to do with it. It's almost like it's walking a tightrope. And I wanted that tension in that corner of the painting. And then here again we have the ship. It's kind of sailing off into the night sky or night sea. It could be either one. But I really did want a feel of constellations in the background. So it, you know, again, it involved a lot of putting on paint and taking off paint and letting it dry and just evolving until it got till the texture and the surface was where I wanted it to be. The title of this piece is I Had to Count on Clouds. Again, it's a line from that poem. And we have two cherubs up here, but instead of having the wings on their back, I like for them to be able to carry their wings so they could take them off at will and have a rest if they so desired. They're actually talking with the clouds and communing with them, and that's why I kind of had these little bubbles down here. I wanted to indicate there's a conversation going on between the red cherub and the blue cherub, and here we have kind of a sea motif in a square that's kind of a water sign. So, you know, everything is sort of, it's a very fluid and very ethereal piece. It's much lighter than any of the others in the show. And it's very, very dark underneath. And again, this one also started out with a really deep, kind of burnt sienna ground. And I just kept, you know, building up these layers of white, but using a translucent white so that you could see all those colors that are underneath them. But the cherubs themselves are rather distinct, almost, you know, graphically, but You know, the clouds and these bubbles are very soft, and I wanted to make everything except for those putti very, very soft. And the wings as well, so that you really focus in on the two figures, but you also focus in on the conversation going on down below. The title of this painting is Venus is Real, and it's the same title as the drawing that we looked at previously, but the painting actually came first, the drawing came second. You know, again we can see one of the viewers of the exhibition was really intrigued with the fact that, you know, Venus seems like an older woman rather than a young one that we tend to associate with Venus. And I really hadn't thought about that, but I thought she's rather ageless. You can't really tell because she's wearing a mask. And I did that intentionally because I wanted her to be this archetypal but approachable figure. She's wearing, again, a pattern dress, and we saw this pattern, you know, on the goats as well. You know, I have some Indian wood blocks, textile wood blocks that I bought years ago, and I kind of recently rediscovered those, and I've been using them to kind of print, you know, onto my boards and see how that affects what happens. You know, again, you can see how this patterning, you can see it here in the dress, you can see some of it in the border along here, and, you know, up through this column, and again up here is poking through, and it gives it a richness and a warmth. I mean, it flattens it in a very interesting way, but it also gives it some depth. And I'm not quite sure how that works, but in this particular painting, it's really interesting because I was also playing with perspective. And this looks like the ball is sitting on that line. This looks like this is coming forward in space, but then you look at it again, and no, it's really not. It's just kind of in a very ambiguous space. And then here, this looks like it could be contained, or it could be going back in space. And then there's a real subtle value shift here. So this looks like the side of a building, and then she's standing in front of it. So it definitely has a very three-dimensional feel to it. That butts up right against this, you know, her brocaded gown here with the pattern on it. It's further complicated, and I did this on purpose because I really wanted to push this idea of transparency that I've been working with the translucent colors. I also wanted to, you know, use perspective in that. So, you know, here I have this building that looks like it's going back, yet this landscape clearly is on the outside, and this is on the inside. So it's kind of a question mark as to, you know, what is this material made out of? Is it solid? In part, it looks like it's solid, but then we've got this landscape that continues from the outside in, you know, with the moon here that makes it very mysterious. You know, the Venus and the raven here are having a conversation. I'm not quite sure what they're talking about, but, you know, again, we have the spiral here, which this I lifted from, you know, a book of motifs on cathedral patternings that you would find on cathedral floors, or primarily in floors, I think, in stonework. But I just thought it looked it was so soft that I just liked how you could interpret a spiral in that way. And it was a natural form, the way a plant would grow. And that's sort of what dynamic symmetry is it's based so much on this spiral. And I thought, well, I wanted it to make it just kind of glow, and I used another technique from a Renaissance painter. I think it was Giorgione again. I must have been reading about him. That when he would do rocks, he would just splatter paint to get a real irregular surface. And actually, he'd do it with a really stiff brush, a really, really stiff brush of some kind. I found a toothbrush worked just as well. So that's how I got this effect here. And then I created a stencil, so it was just that area I wanted to have that effect. And then I had to go back in with the blue and kind of, clean that up a bit so that form could really emerge. This has a lot of orbs going on. You've got the two down here, which are very golden. It's almost like they're being the reflections from her dress. These are really tied together here. And then she's holding a little orb. And I think that that's just almost like a flashlight, so she can see where she's going. Although she kind of has the attitude that she knows where she's going. I don't think she's too confused about anything. There's a lot of confidence in there. The lines in this one, aside from kind of establishing some interesting things with perspective, they also function as the lines of the poem again, and kind of that duality with being a border. Having some of that Indian woodblock, fabric woodblock come through was really a nice surprise at the end, and I'm glad that I hadn't covered that up. And then I also wanted to have these orbs suspended from space, so that the painting's contained, but it also references, a much larger, greater cosmos. And, I was just having fun with this. I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a lantern hanging from the border, or from this line of poetry. I think this was the last piece I completed. And I really started thinking about how memorizing the poem really affected the work, because I could see how some of the pieces actually mirror the structure of the poem. That's why we kind of had the couplings of the young man and the baby, and the bringing in the night and bringing in the day. And the part of the poem where Venus is actually mentioned is a very complex part. There's a lot going in that. This young man discovers women, and you can just see the passion and the confusion and the self-doubt that all kind of converge in this one stanza. So the painting became much more complex. And, I really wasn't that aware of it while I was doing it, but afterwards, again, there's this delayed meaning. Afterwards, I think it really does bear a striking resemblance to the poem itself and the structure of the poem. That was a really nice benefit from working with that poem, from working from memory, rather than actually having to go back and refer to the text.